Hi, my name is Nana. I am a solo expat who moved to beautiful Colombia, South America, to retire almost 2 years ago. Recently, I had the pleasure of meeting Laura Deming, who is a nationally certified therapist who specializes in working with expats. And from the moment I met Laura, I couldn't help but think, if only I had had her expertise all along in the planning stages in my first year of acclimating here. I didn't even know that an expat counselor or therapist even existed. So I'm absolutely thrilled for our video today. And with that, I would like to introduce Laura. So, hi, Laura, and welcome.
Hi, Nana. Very nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So, Laura, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What motivated you to become a therapist, and in particular, an expat therapist?
Sure. Yeah, I grew up kind of like a military brat, or what we used to call military brats. My dad was a project manager on large construction projects, and so we traveled all over the world. When I was growing up, I lived in Asia, Africa, the Middle East, South America. I graduated from high school in Argentina. And in my 20s and 30s, I kept traveling and living abroad. But then when I was about 40, I decided to go back and re-career. And I was in the US and I decided to become a therapist. And it was just a natural progression that I would eventually become an expat therapist. I guess it was inevitable, even if I didn't know that in earlier years. So now I have a practice in Berlin, Germany for the past 20 years, an expat practice. And I work with all the usual issues that any therapist would, of course, but I specialize also in working with expat issues in particular. I work in person in Berlin, but I also work remotely all over the world, and I have clients really on every continent.
Wow, that's amazing. And what type of training do you have, and what type of therapy? Does it have a name specifically that you practice?
I got my master's in counseling psychology from Arizona State University, and I've also had specialized training in a lot of other areas and issues: stress and anxiety management, couples counseling, career and life transitions. But my main focus has always been cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a short-term therapy. People see results from it fairly quickly. It's usually very rewarding kind of therapy to be doing because I see people having results, and that's not on me. That's just cognitive behavioral therapy. It's very effective. So I've been a cognitive behavioral therapist primarily, but again, with this extra specialization of working with expats.
So when we met, I know you mentioned that you've even worked with embassies, and really what type of clients do you have in general? And what type of people do you help?
Well, really, it's surprising, I think, to many people who have not lived abroad, how many different kinds of people and how many different kinds of professions actually are expats. Obviously, I've worked with people at embassies and given talks at embassies and helped newcomers adjustment to their new city, things like that. But I've also worked with aid workers in Africa, startup CEOs, just regular business people, accompanying spouses, university students who have maybe gone abroad to get their graduate degree. A number of Fulbright scholars, for example, come to Berlin each year. The universities there seem to be very popular with American students. And of course, I also, because of my specialization with transitions, I work a lot with people who might be changing career, or maybe a life change. Maybe it's divorce, maybe it's some kind of midlife issue, new career, or retiring. I do work a lot with retirees also.
So many of my viewers, Laura, actually are getting ready to retire or are retired. And that's really what's giving them interest in changing their life, obviously, and leaving the country in many cases. So, in what ways have you helped those who are retired, and also couples, I assume, too, who are about to retire or retire?
Yes, well, retirement in itself, of course, is a giant change. My gosh, it's probably one of the biggest changes we ever go through in our lives. Trying to suddenly not having that identity we had before, trying to figure out what new identity we want, who we want to be, what we want to do. The choices are endless. And sometimes, of course, that can be scary.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sometimes people don't realize the choices are endless. That's another issue. But yeah, if people are considering going abroad, then they're going to have a lot of questions and they're going to experience a lot of concerns that are going to key into their own psychological issues. You know, for example, if someone is somewhat perfectionistic, they're going to worry that they won't make the right choice about the place or about doing it, and they can get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly a therapist can help them with that. You know, there's a saying in therapy that I like a lot. If you want advice, ask friends or family. If you want to figure out what you want to do, ask a counselor. And I think of that as my job. If someone comes to me and they're trying to decide whether or not to move abroad, or maybe they're trying to decide which place to go, my goal is to help them figure out what they really want to do, not tell them what to do. And I think this is a real big distinction between talking to friends, which is important, of course, or family, but having someone who's on your side in the sense that they're going to try to help you really key into what it is you most want to do.
Yes, I think it's hard for a lot of people to be able to answer those questions of themselves. And oftentimes we put ourselves in the position of just avoiding certain things or brushing off certain topics or not really diving deep and understanding what it is that makes us happy.
Yes, absolutely. And it's very easy also to get a little too influenced by the people around us.
Yes.
And if this has been a problem in the person's earlier life, where maybe they were people pleasers or worried what other people thought, then it's going to be very hard for them to make that step, because it still seems a little unusual to many people to be moving abroad, even though it's much more common now than it was, gosh, even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So, for those that are in that contemplation stage, considering moving abroad, which can be really stressful for a lot of people, what type of helpful tips can you give us today that can help along the way with that?
Well, I think it's very important, kind of like I said in previously, to try to figure out what you really want to do. To try not to be thinking about, well, what will other people think, or what if I make a mistake and I'm not happy once I go, or worrying about things down the road. I think it's really important to identify what we want to do. At the same time, how are you going to figure that out? Well, one of the ways is a lot of due diligence. You really want to do information gathering, and that's talked about a lot. You've done some wonderful videos on that yourself, and there are many other ones on YouTube that touch on this. The idea that we need to do research. We need to figure out where we want to go. And then we need to figure out if we're really going to take the leap and do it. And having confidence in yourself once you've decided that you want to do it, and staying positive and trying to block out the naysayers a little bit. These things in themselves can go a long way. But like I said, if somebody's stuck, they can also talk to a therapist, and the therapist will help them clarify their options and look at the pros and cons, for example, of each option, and that can help the person get unstuck if that is a point that they've come to.
And I think that's such a good point. As I try myself just to give general advice on my channel, and when people do expat consults with me, and sometimes express fears and whatnot. But with someone like you are getting to know who that person is and their history, because there could be certain patterns and things going on, I would assume, and you're able to dive into that and help this person with those patterns, right?
Yes, exactly. I mean,
Mhm.
to give an example from another kind of issue, I often help people re-career, find new careers in midlife, or find careers that paths they want to do after retirement. And I worked with a woman once who had dropped out of med school because it wasn't suiting her. Her whole family, of course, thought she was crazy. I
Mhm.
helped her go through some career exploration exercises, and we worked together. And
Yeah.
ultimately, it turned out that she wanted to be a florist. But she didn't
But
know. She thought it wouldn't be acceptable to her family.
oh,
And so she had been kind of hiding that in herself for years.
wow.
And it's the same thing, when we retire, it's just human nature. We're easily influenced by other people. And
Mhm.
it's a challenge to get to a point where we're doing what we want to do. And even though we know it might not work out, it's still, it's worth it. We want to do it.
Absolutely. So we brushed on a topic. This was something that was a struggle for me, and that was family pushback and not wanting any type of estrangement or anyone blaming me for moving thousands of miles away and all of those stresses that I had before and even after, which all for me fortunately turned out fine. But I think there's a lot of pressure for people with that, leaving family and close friends. So, how can you help with that, Laura?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's one thing for me to say, oh, just figure out what you really want to do and do it. But let's face it, of course, we care very much about our family and friends, and we don't want to alienate them. We don't want them to be scared for us or worried about us. And so it's kind of a process. I think that some of these ideas of what we might want to do, maybe they need to be brought up kind of gradually.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody's watched House Hunters International, maybe you've got a family member who's watched a show like that on HGTV, or has looked at a YouTube video one time about something related to moving abroad. These little things can sometimes help people be a little more open to it. And I think a kind of a gradual introduction probably is a good idea. And then you can kind of see who is going to have a little more trouble with the idea than others. And you can think about a good strategy for helping them feel more comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Often people worry. They just worry, and they don't, and they're going to miss you, of course. But I think a lot of it is, oh, worry, and especially if we're older. Unfortunately, while we might still feel in our 50s, 60s, and beyond that we are confident people, a lot of times our adult children or other friends might worry about us. Oh, there's no one size fits all for how to ease that. But it's good to understand that there probably will be pushback, and for all sorts of reasons. And some of those reasons you can easily quiet just with things you find online, thanks to the internet, whether it is a YouTube video talking about the country you want to go to,
Mm-hmm.
safety statistics that you can pull up online about how much safer it is, to live in Puerto Vallarta than Chicago, or
Yes.
whatever issue seems to be concerning the individual
Mm-hmm.
person. I think it's also important to remember that when people do object, they're objecting for their own reasons on some level.
Yeah.
So, for example, someone else who's retired but stayed in their environment, stayed in their hometown, and maybe is volunteering and doing some things, but didn't take any kind of giant leap, that person might even feel a little funny about it or a little jealous about it in a way, and not a bad way. I mean, they're your friends, they care about you. But my point is that there are a lot of different reasons why people might respond negatively. And so it's good to take each one individually and try to think about, what can I do to reassure this person and help them know that what I'm doing is what I want, but I'm still there for them, and I'll still always be a part of their lives too.
Mm-hmm. That's all really good advice. And I know for me that the objections that I was experiencing from family actually came from love. Number one, they were thinking they're going to miss me terribly, and
Yeah.
the safety thing, all of these things. So instead of combating it and turning it into a battle, I just
Mhm.
approached it in a loving and nurturing way. And I know after I got here, I did a lot of FaceTime. Uh,
Mhm.
So, because that's the other thing too, you move to another country and sometimes, like I'm in Colombia, and there's all of these misconceptions about what it's like here. And I had the best time FaceTiming my kids. I'd be in this gorgeous environment, and everything's clean and safe and normal. And I'm getting a plate of food that looks delicious and, all those things that reassuring them. So, yeah, and staying in touch, that's important too.
Yeah, what you mentioned is very important. And thankfully, the internet, there's a lot of things about the internet that we get frustrated by at times. But at least, yeah, you can stay in touch and you can even show people where you're living, like you have done for your subscribers as well, and shown how lovely your area is. I'm reminded when my mother and father were traveling around the world in the 60s, my God, their family back in the US, we often didn't even have telephones.
Yeah.
Letters would take maybe 6 weeks from some of the places. I
Yes.
mean, you really were gone, kind of felt like you were gone forever
Yes.
if you weren't nearby. Luckily, that's all over now, but it does take the people back home a little while to really figure that out. So we just need to be, I think, gentle with them and understanding.
That's a really good point. A little bit ago, Laura, you mentioned couples, and let's dive into that a little bit. If you can explain, I mean, I didn't have that issue. I'm solo. So how does that work? I mean, if you have a couple thinking about moving, and do you do the therapy? I guess it's similar to like marriage therapy or counseling, right? Where you're working with two people?
That's a good point, and it's something I don't hear talked about very much or see much in the books or videos about people moving abroad. It's hard for couples sometimes to agree about what they want to do on a Sunday afternoon, much less what they want to do about totally changing their lives. It is a big, giant change. It often means selling your house, selling or giving away a lot of your stuff. It means you're going to be far away from family and the grandkids and so on. So even deciding to do something like this is a very big thing, and it can be tough for each partner to agree. And let's suppose they've agreed they're going to move abroad. They then have the challenge of, well, where are we going to move? Are we going to, maybe one wants to move to Colombia and one wants to move to Panama. Maybe they go and visit both places like you and I both recommend. But now the one who liked Colombia still likes Colombia best, and the one who wanted Panama still wants Panama. And, they're stuck. So this is actually an area where couples therapy can help a lot because the therapist can help them. I do this a lot about all sorts of issues, of course, not just moving abroad, but the counselor can help the couple be honest about their reservations, honest about their concerns, honest about things that are holding them back. They can hopefully, the counselor can be that third party who helps them work it out, basically.
Right.
And if they're not able to work it out and agree, then I recommend, of course, assuming your relationship is a high priority for you, I recommend holding off until you can both get on the same page. I don't recommend moving if one partner doesn't want to, because then you're really kind of just gambling that they might like it after they get there. But I'd rather see both people on board from the beginning if possible.
Well, and I know, I mean, even not just in the early planning stages on a country, but when you pick a country or an area, like the region I'm in has fincas, which are little farmhouses in the rural countryside, or it has very luxurious, sophisticated condominium communities with all the bells and whistles and whatnot. And with the one spouse could be wanting more of the condo living. The other has dreams of being out in the country, maybe having some horses. So I would imagine it's just there's compromises, right? I mean, it's a little give and take to come up with a plan that's going to make them both happy.
Yes, and you point out something that's very important because there are decisions that need to be made all along the way, and you want people to be able to come up with compromises they're both comfortable with. There are a lot of compromises that are going to come up even after people move. I mean, it's kind of endless, where in a sense, in a different way than if you're both just staying in your hometown and kind of keeping up with your usual routines, except you're retired or something. I mean, there are decisions to be made often about a lot of different things. And fair to say that if you have a good, strong relationship before you go, you're in a much better place.
Yes, and be able to support one another.
Yeah.
Well, I also know I talk to a lot of couples, and one may be bilingual, fluent also in Spanish, and the other is not. The other who's not is a bit fearful of maybe not being able to make friends or being lonely. There's so many. I'm just thinking of all these different dynamics, that can come up in that type of situation where there's two.
Yes, and also, by the way, sometimes a person might be moving, let's say, to Colombia to be with somebody who is Colombian, or maybe they were married to a Colombian back in the US. Now they're both moving to Colombia.
Yes.
This adds a lot of extra elements of potential conflict into the mix. And yeah, it's quite complicated. In my years as an expat therapist, I've worked with many couples where one of the mixed nationality couples, where one of them, was in the country that they're born in, and the other one's coming from another country. And there are a lot of special challenges to that the person, let's say in this case, the Colombian person, might not understand what the other one is going through. So that would be a book in itself.
No, I can imagine. And how helpful to be. I mean, before I met you, I had never heard of a expat therapist that has, the type of experience that you have that's just so honed in and all these things. Because again, I know from my consults, which have to do with, planning for relocation, all those sorts of things, but these subjects come up so often. And I can only, graze over them. But I know for a lot of people that your type of help would be so important, so important.
Well, thank you. Yes, I agree with that. And luckily, there are more and more expat therapists all the time, partly because there are so many more people going abroad, right? I mean, there are more expats, and so there are more expat therapists. That actually brings up a point that I wanted to be sure to touch on here, and that is the importance of working with a therapist who does have expat experience.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't recommend just working with somebody in your home country who's never been abroad or never lived abroad, I should say, or someone who hasn't worked with expats before. Or let's say you have someone from the US moving to Colombia because their partner's Colombian. I don't recommend just going to a Colombian therapist in a case like that, because that person, they may be wonderful therapists, but they're not going to know or understand all the different issues that the expat is going through coming into their country.
Yes.
So for all sorts of reasons, the same if you're a couple or individual moving abroad to begin with. If you just ask a therapist back in your hometown or wherever you're living, who knows? Maybe they're going to try to influence you not to do it because they're going to think it sounds so out there. Yes. So you want to be careful that the person you're going to work with, the therapist you're going to work with, has experience in the area with the issues that you're actually dealing with.
That makes a lot of sense. Very good advice. Well, let's segue into after the move and the acclimating. What type of advice can you give for that, Laura?
I think it's very important to be just generally aware of the so-called culture shock stages. And the first stage is the honeymoon stage, where hopefully you're going to be happy and you're going to be enjoying the decision you made and getting settled. Yeah, there are going to be annoyances and frustrations, but they're not going to bother you very much because you're in the honeymoon stage. But the second stage is the frustration stage, sometimes called the crisis stage. And this is a stage that people often don't recognize because sometimes it sort of creeps up on you slowly. All of a sudden, you're starting to think a little more negatively about that hassle you go through every time you try to buy a particular thing in the grocery store, the meat's being cut in a different way or whatever it might be. All of a sudden, these things, these negatives, that seemed kind of amusing maybe when you first move there. It's like they suddenly get big neon signs on them and you don't like them anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a very tough time. People usually aren't expecting it. They don't know what to do about it. Couples, like we talked about earlier, couples, one person may be experiencing that stage already and the other person maybe not. Or of course you go in and out of these stages too. They're not fixed and absolute or anything. So I would say that is the main crisis point, frankly, after people move abroad.
Okay. And I know, again, I'm just listening to all this great advice and explanations and everything from you, and just kind of absorbing and thinking about myself. I know what happened with me with certain frustrations is they're kind of cute, when they first happen, and just like, oh, whatever. But when something gets repetitive and it's continually difficult to do a particular task or whatever that is, yes, it can get frustrating. I understand that.
Yes, and also a little bit like we talked about, the things that come up before people are trying to make a decision. If we tend to be maybe a little perfectionistic or hard on ourselves, we might start feeling extra upset about everything, like, oh no, I made the wrong decision, or oh no, what am I doing now?
Yes.
And of course, that has a cascading effect.
Yes.
And a lot of times we've joined, may seem like a little bit of a segue, but it's related. A lot of times people have joined expat groups locally, which is recommended and a great idea, but you need to be a little careful about the tenor of the group. Because if you end up in a group where everybody's focusing on sitting around complaining through the whole lunch meeting or whatever it might be, that is going to influence you. So it's wonderful to join expat groups, but you also have to be really careful not to spend too much time around people who are only focusing on the negative, because that is contagious.
No, that makes good sense. And one other thing that I've experienced, thank goodness it doesn't happen that often, and there's probably some more formal way of putting it, is be totally out of the blue. And it's usually at night that this would happen, and probably only happens to me maybe once every 3 months or so, where all of a sudden it just hits me. It just hits me. I am in another country. All my family, everyone is so far away. What did I do? I mean, it's a sort of overwhelming, I don't know where that comes from. And I am able to get myself back on track. Does that make sense? That kind of just, it's almost like you sort of wake up from a dream and you don't know where you are, kind of a thing. So I wake up and I go, oh my gosh, I'm in another country. Like, what did I do? Type of a feeling. Is that something that people have that struggle with it, where maybe it happens often?
Well, these things are very individual. And so this is normal for these to have these kinds of feelings. It takes our body and brain a long time to adjust to things that are so different. And especially, gosh, in those early weeks, it almost feels like you're just there on vacation or having a fun little extended vacation. But at a certain point, it's like, oh man, I really live here.
Yes.
And sometimes that might be great, and sometimes that might be really scary. This brings up something else I want to mention that I don't hear talked about a lot. When we are going through a transition, there's a grief process. And even if it's a transition we really wanted, there is still grieving. And that grieving is often going on in the background somewhere. We're not necessarily always aware of it, but we're grieving. We're grieving what we left, even if we wanted to leave it. We're grieving what we used to have, or the identity we had back in our home country, even though we're happy to be where we are now. And so that kind of gets in the way sometimes, in a sense that it can be hard to recognize, but it's good to know. Grief is a familiar friend, let's say, during this whole process.
Yes. No, that makes a lot of sense. So let's go back, Laura, to this frustration stage that you mentioned. So what are some unhealthy things that people do during this that perpetuates it longer? And then what are the strategies to help work through that stage?
Yes, that is a big question because everyone is different and what's going to help them. But in general, don't hide at home. Get yourself out. I remember watching one of your videos that was about a little bit of this recently. It was very, very nicely done. Get out, try to make friends or spend time with your friends that you've already made there. Try not to just hang out at home and grump and complain and feel sad. At the same time, you have to acknowledge those feelings. It's natural to feel, oh, I'm frustrated here, I don't like it, I don't like this or that about it, and I'm homesick, and I miss the grandkids, why did I do this, whatever. These are unhealthy things to focus on for very long. They're natural thoughts, but you don't want to keep focusing on them and letting them grow more into those flashing neon signs in front of your head. But also, it's important to be kind to yourself during this period and to understand that it's normal, to understand that it will probably pass and that it's completely okay, and be gentle with yourself during this period. Try not to overreact to it. A lot of times people immediately just decide, oh, I need to move home again, or oh, I need to move to another country instead. I highly recommend writing out the frustration stage as much as possible. I mean, unless you're just insanely unhappy. I highly recommend writing it out and giving it time, and also putting off making any decision about it. If you notice that you're unhappy and you're in that frustration stage, give yourself a time limit at least before you decide to do something different, pull the plug or whatever. Maybe a 6-month time frame where you say, okay, this is January. If I still feel like this in July, I'm going to think about what I want to do next.
Right.
But try not to make any rash decisions. Try to be kind to yourself. Obviously, try not to abuse alcohol or things like that, or get caught up in addictive shopping online or whatever. Try to stay healthy. Try to eat well. Take care of yourself, and then be patient.
Okay. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of it probably has to do with where someone has moved. I know it's been very helpful for me here in Colombia that all the neighbors, all the people that I've met, because it's predominantly Colombians where I live, are so warm. And I tend to be a little bit introverted. And I will say no, sometimes to certain invitations, but I keep busy and there's so much love extended to me that it diverts me away from those types of feelings and makes me very joyful about being here because I feel supported. But you made a really good point to move out of the country, no matter where it is. It could be the warmest place, emotionally on the planet. And if that person isn't willing to engage, that yes, the frustrations can obviously get much worse because they're just alone, with their own thoughts all the time.
Yes, and by the way, that reminds me of something you talking about how lucky you are to have warm, friendly neighbors and so on. It does depend on what country you go to. There are countries you could go to where the people, I'm sure, are very nice, but they actually aren't very welcoming to foreigners. And that can make it tougher. Yes, you want to befriend other expats, of course, but in your day-to-day life and building friendships, you would like to also get to know people from the culture you've moved to. And that does differ a lot from culture to culture. Also, our expectations about culture shock will differ a lot. For example, sometimes a person moving to, I don't know, Africa, somewhere in Africa, actually has an easier adjustment than somebody moving to, let's say, Germany. Because the person moving to Germany didn't expect it to be very difficult because it kind of looks like the US. What's the big deal? I just need to learn the language. But actually, there are so many differences, even if they're not obvious on the surface. If you're moving to, let's say, Liberia, from the get-go, yeah, this is real different. I'm going to have trouble. This is going to be, But it can be deceptive. And where you're living now is such a beautiful, gorgeous place that you maybe experience a little of that yourself at times. I don't know.
Yeah, I've just been really fortunate. And that was part of my research too. I did ask myself a lot of questions and I have traveled not extensively, but quite a bit during my life. And so I had a general sense from certain regions of the world that I'm just trying to say this politely, that the sort of emotional climate, much more reserved. Not my heritage is Italian. I'm very warm and huggy and all that. And I think for me, it would have been difficult in a country like that, where people don't show their emotions or feelings and don't open up and really communicate much. So, yeah. And I think for most people that are leaving the US now, the US, and I explain this to Colombians here, because I point out the differences, and they'll say, "Oh, that's such a shame. The U.S. is like that." And I always say to them, "Well, it didn't used to be. It's something that was lost." So in the U.S., you know how everyone lives in their bubble now, and they're in suburbia, and they don't have a front porch, and they don't say hi to their neighbors. And that kind of thing. The whole lifestyle is different. And then, but in certain countries, it's very warm and friendly. With the whole neighborhood knows one another. And if someone's sick, everybody's checking on them and those types of things. So I think it's important to know, you know, obviously your own personality and what type of environment that that you want. But obviously with you, Laura, I mean, you're giving you're providing therapy for people that sometimes don't have a choice. They're going for a job, right?
That's true. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
They're sent somewhere. So most of my viewers, you know, have these choices. So that in itself is empowering for those people because they have that choice. So
absolutely, it's empowering, but it can also be a little scary because then it's all on you.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Just say, well, you know, so I'm not very happy here, but you know, my boss assigned me here, I'm stuck or whatever. Sometimes this tendency to turn on ourselves if we aren't happy, especially during that frustration stage, we can more easily blame ourselves because we don't have anybody else to blame.
Wow, you've definitely heard it all. It's seen it all, Laura. Totally out of the blue. I didn't ask you in the beginning. So how long have you been doing this? How long have you been a therapist for expats?
Oh, well, what I did after I got my master's in counseling psychology, I ended up working, I had a small practice, and I also ended up working at a local college. I taught psychology courses like Psych 101, and I also taught courses in the counseling department. Women in Transition was my favorite. It was only called Women in Transition because no men ever signed up. Sorry to say. The course had originally been called Adults in Transition, but anyway.
Wow.
Anyway, so I did work in the college system for several years. I had a small practice. I did some other things, speaking engagements, helping people with recareering issues, things like that. But I was just drawn to living abroad again. So it was just so natural to become an expat therapist. And I did that in my 40s. Moved to Berlin, Germany, and opened a practice. And yeah, it was just like putting on, you know, what's that expression about? I don't know, putting a pair of familiar old socks or something. It just felt like such a natural fit for me. I was surprised I hadn't thought about it 20 years sooner, frankly.
And especially after having grown up, just traveling the world.
Like that.
So well, you already knew the lifestyle and everything that experienced it.
Yeah. And in those days, there weren't really expat therapists, of course. And, and there weren't even books about it. When I think about our parents' generation who did live abroad, or people like my own parents, they really just had to invent every day. You know, there wasn't anything they could look at for any help on that. But yeah, nowadays it's much more common, and it's becoming quite common to go into this area, especially for a therapist who has lived abroad at some point in the past. I've met several expat therapists who actually maybe did a junior year abroad. And that junior year abroad, 8 years before or whatever, you know, planted the seed of wanting to live abroad again. And then they're thinking about, oh, I want to become an expat therapist. I get contacted quite often by people interested in that too, since my website's out there.
Oh, definitely. So, Laura, what final piece of advice would you give to somebody that is thinking about embarking on such a journey?
I feel like we've probably talked about a lot of the downsides or the scary parts or the frustrating parts. Really, my advice would be to focus on the positives. It's very exhilarating. It can be so exciting to get outside of our comfort zones and do something so different. Things like learning a language, new language, which can be challenging, as we all know. Heck, I mean, there's study after study that talks about how great that is for our brains, especially our
Mhm.
aging brains.
Mhm.
There's so many wonderful things for us health wise and brain wise to be getting out of our comfort zone and doing something different. And you know what? Be gentle with yourself. As I've said before, if it turns out it doesn't work out for you, that's okay too.
Yeah.
There's no shame in, going home after a year or two or moving to a different place. This is
Mhm.
okay. Everybody does these things, but I think it's worth it. If you're interested and it's really kind of lit a fire in you, I would say, let that fire burn. Of course, do your due diligence, do a lot of research. By the way, I can highly recommend a book regarding that, which I swear I'm not being paid for this promotion. I don't even know the man. It's A Better Life for Half the Price by Tim Leffel. And although this edition is from, I think 2020, so the prices in the different countries will obviously have changed, but the first 60 pages of the book are about all the different steps and phases you go through as you're trying to decide whether to move or not. And
Oh, wow.
he has great like checklists of things to do when you go for the visit, things to look at, things to be checking, things to check before you move, things to think about when you're trying to choose which country. I first read that years ago, and I was very impressed with how wide it is, the areas he talks about. So I do recommend that actually. I
Okay.
don't know. I don't know.
And I will have up on the screen, post edit, the information on the book, the title, and the author. So if anybody's interested in that, but that sounds fantastic. Really, really helpful. Well, Laura, I can't thank you enough for all the valuable information and insight you've given all of us today. I know I've learned an awful lot. And I do want to let everyone know that I have Laura's website link in the description right below this video if you'd like to contact her. So, Laura, if you can explain how that works when someone reaches out to you, what happens next?
Yes, if anybody's interested, they can use the contact sheet on my website, or they can write me directly at my email, which is info@expatcounselingservices.com.
Mhm.
I also have a colleague in Berlin and who works with the same issues I do, David Rosenstock, and his information is also on the website. But yeah, just get in touch if you have any questions or you'd like to have some kind of initial discussion at no obligation. I'd be very happy to talk with anybody who gets in touch. And mention, by the way, if you did hear about me because of the interview today, I'd appreciate knowing that.
Oh, and I'm so glad you brought that up too, Laura, because I do want to point out to everyone that this is not a paid promotion in any way. I just personally was blown away when I met Laura and found out what she did. And I said, oh my gosh, this is going to be so helpful to so many of my viewers and also myself. So this is completely non-affiliated on my part. I just wanted to share everything that Laura has to offer everyone with everybody.
Well, and I really appreciate you inviting me. And, I hope that I have given some helpful thoughts here and there. And as I think I said earlier, you have a wonderful channel and you do a great job of helping people prepare for a big move and letting them know what your area of Colombia is like. I really like your channel. It's really good.
Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you too, Nana.